Welcome to part 2 of Working with a Financial Neutral in a Collaborative Divorce Process in Washington State. In part 1, Jennie Bouska, who is a financial neutral, walked us through the specific meetings and processes that are part of working with a financial neutral. In part 2 of this series, she'll answer a whole bunch of questions that normally come up for clients during this process. If you haven't watched part 1, we highly recommend that you go back and watch that before listening to part 2. But if you've already done part 1, then jump on in and enjoy this Q&A session with Jennie Bouska. I want to ask you a few questions that I know come up for a lot of folks. You mentioned deciding who might keep the family home. And I wonder if there's some conversation about refinancing or how to move the home from perhaps being owned by two people to being owned by one person.
Always, every single case. And there's not a right or wrong answer when it comes to refinancing or who keeps the house. It really comes down to the preference of our clients. So, for example, if you have a client that they both have great credit, they both trust each other, maybe there's kids in the house, or maybe there's somebody who hasn't worked and they need some time to gain full employment or increase their salary or whatnot, to give them time to refinance. Most people have a mortgage on their home. And if they do, so you've got, the title of the house, who's on title, and then you've got your mortgage, who's on the mortgage. It's both people that are on the mortgage and both people are on title. Well, you can quit claim somebody off of title. So you only have one owner. But to get somebody off of a mortgage, it's either a refinance or you can try for a qualified name delete assumption, which I tell people it's a bit of a unicorn out there. Not all lenders know about it or do it, but in today's market with today's interest rates, it really is worth trying to get that. You would want to talk to a mortgage professional about that. I actually am a mortgage professional, although I don't hang my license with anybody. So I can speak to it from an educated point of view, and then I would direct you to a mortgage professional that could help you with either a loan assumption or at least figuring out all the different avenues of refinancing the home. I've seen people make decisions to keep the home for 5 years or a certain amount of time, and then either refinance at that point in time or sell at that point in time. I've seen people make all sorts of neat, fun decisions around the house so that the person who keeps the house can keep the refinance rate likely that they did in 2020 and 2021, of which we won't see those rates anytime soon.
So, what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of possibilities, and I love how you use the word scenarios too, just talking about how things end up getting divided up and how the house is dealt with. There's a lot of options. I think that that is something that most folks going through a divorce have no concept of all the different ways that things could be structured and the creativity that could be brought to a solution that really is in the best interest of both parties.
And I will say, I've seen really creative ideas come from our clients because even as professionals, we've seen the same things over and over and over again. So we know what's out there. But every now and then we have a client say, "Can we do this?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a great idea. Can we do that? Let's
Yeah.
talk about that." And they have. Like there's a case where they chose spousal support in lieu of pension. It was like client kept 100% of pension, but then paid spousal support. And with collaborative law, with this particular couple in this particular case, they were able to put together a cohesive agreement that they both liked. And to the best of my knowledge, have kept with, and it's worked out well for them.
That's so cool. Talk to me a little bit about where the calculation of child support comes in. My sense is that's a separate conversation. Folks often want to mix it in, but it actually is a separate conversation.
Yeah, that is. And depending on the CDFA that you talk to, some CDFAs will do the child support worksheet, and I refuse to do the child support worksheet. It is a legal document. I'm going to let the attorneys take care of it. That's their thing. In Washington State, it is an actual calculator. So they are looking at your income. They do take into consideration tax implications. They do take into consideration contributions to a retirement account. There are limitations on what you can count for your contributions. That's where collaborative law is so nice because you have the full team. So if it's a question that I don't have an answer to, that's what the attorneys are there for. They get to answer all of the legal questions and we just get to play with numbers, which is
Right, right. Well, what I appreciate about what you've explained here is that we're really giving folks the sense that there is a financial property distribution conversation. There's a process for going through that. There's a process, if you have kids, for developing a parenting plan. And there's a process for coming up with the child support
yes.
calculations, right?
Yes.
So often folks from just inexperience and not knowing, because there's no reason anybody should know any of this stuff
Agreed.
that's not a
Hmm.
divorce professional, there's a sense of mixing those three conversations. And what I love about you sharing the details of this part of the process is just to highlight that we keep those three conversations separate and they're calculated separately. Yeah,
We do, and and then we fold them together. So they
right.
are separate, but at the end of the day, is the whole thing big picture cohesive? It's an interesting thing that I know that like if spousal support becomes a conversation, a person who's receiving spousal support, it's shown as income on their child support worksheet. So it affects how child support gets granted. So oftentimes when we're looking at support, we may be looking at overall what does the person who needs support, what do they need? Then we'll figure out, okay, well, how much of that is child support? How much of that is spousal support? Spousal support and child support are worked differently when it comes to mortgages. So
Hmm.
then you talk about refinancing. How does that play into thing? And there's a whole song and dance. I always call refinancing your home and filing for divorce, it's a dance of timing. It really does kind of fold all in together eventually, but you're right. The conversations start out compartmentalized, which I
Hmm.
think is where we need to do.
Talk to me a little bit about a client that comes in who has kids and you're asking them to give you some numbers about what they spend. And they're saying, maybe I have a 2 and a 4 year old right now. How am I supposed to guess what childcare in 3 years is going to look like, or what I'm going to need to pay for sports or for college, even like looking that far ahead? How do we even wrap our brain around what we spend?
What I'm looking for is spending near future. What are we spending today? And most times people don't even know what they're spending on their kids versus themselves. And I'm like, okay, well, if you didn't have kids and you went to the grocery store, how much would you spend on yourself like every month? Like if you think about it versus what do I spend on my kids? Like what would I spend if I didn't have kids? It's a little bit easier. And I ask people to do whatever works for them. So some people are super detail oriented. They're going to pull out 12 months worth of bank statements and they're going to create spreadsheets and they're going to have it down to a penny. I kind of am that person, but most people are not. So they are going to ballpark it. I'm perfectly fine with that. The people that do the shopping for the family, it's a little bit easier of a process for them, right? They know how much they spend every week at Fred Meyer's or every week at Costco. They know how much it's costing them to fill up the gas and so on and so forth. In your gut, like give me a number. What are we looking through? And then we'll go through and we'll fine tune, but that's the start of the conversation. When it comes to future endeavors like putting little Sally in dance or in Little League or whatever it is, if select soccer is your thing or horseback riding, whatever it is, oftentimes the reason those questions come up is how do we pay for it? So then that plays into the child support worksheet and what agreements do our parents want to make and how do you want to reach those agreements? Do we make agreements to pay for the expense proportionate to income? How do you want to have the conversation as to whether or not we agree to incur said expense? What does that involve? What if one parent doesn't agree? So it's very interesting because we do get to have these conversations where I understand by talking with other attorneys that these types of conversations don't often happen in litigated cases where
Hmm.
you're more stereotypical, we're going to court kind of a case.
Hmm.
These conversations get to happen outside of court, which is a great place to be when you have all of these types of questions.
Right. Well, and what I love about it too is it just plants the seed. It gives the co-parents a plan for how they're going to deal with these things. It's not like we have to decide when our kids are 2 and 4, are they going to do select soccer or are they going to go on some band trip? Instead, it's like, what will our process be to make those decisions? And what can we plan on? If we work this process that we have chosen and we decide we are going to send, Sammy to this special band thing, then we've already decided how we're going to split that cost. Whatever it
Exactly.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Clients will ask the questions of us, but oftentimes we might say, well, here's some ideas to get the conversation rolling, but we're always putting it back on our clients. You tell us,
Mhm.
what do you want? What do you think? What works best for the two of you? How are you currently communicating with each other? It can actually be super simple, and oftentimes it is. And if
Mhm.
it isn't, then we build some parameters around it. We give them guidelines or help them create the guidelines that they both want to agree to.
One last question. I'm thinking of a client who perhaps there's been one working parent and one stay-at-home parent. And
Mhm,
now this stay-at-home parent is really worried about finances going forward,
mhm.
recognizing they're going to have to get back into the workforce in some way, and really scared that there's going to be some cliff.
Oh, sure.
The money's just going to disappear and things are going to be really horrible. Talk me through just how you approach them to help develop a realistic plan of moving forward.
So oftentimes there's already a plan generating. Like
Mm,
it's kind of interesting to see there's already some wheels turning with lots of questions and safety. Like you're in a safe place here. Let's talk about this. We can help build those plans. For example, if somebody wants to go back to school to either finish a degree or get a certification to do something, great. Now let's do some research. And I always have them do the research because we need concrete information or as much concrete information as we can. Okay, well, how long does the program last? How much does the program cost? Are there books that are going to be involved? Can you work part-time while you're going to school? Is this a full-time coding boot camp that's 15 weeks long or 9 months long or however, or is it a 2 year long program? Oftentimes the person, if there is an ability to pay, because that's the thing, if we're talking about spousal support, if there's an ability to pay and there's an end game, an end date in sight, because I was talking with a therapist who I love and adore, and he said at one point in time, the person who pays support doesn't feel divorced until the last support payment. So can you imagine if you had 5 years worth of support payments and you just don't feel divorced for 5 years? The person receiving support feels divorced the day the divorce is finalized because, whew, I'm done. And I just thought that is brilliant. So we want to take into consideration both thought processes. The other thing is the person receiving support, to your point, is if it's 5 years, they know they have 60 months and the clock is ticking because the second they receive that first payment, now we're down to 59 and holy smokes. So we're trying to build in a safety net. We're trying to do everything that we can to help them and support them in the avenue that they want to create because they know that they are going to need to be self-sufficient. And it's amazing to me how many people are like on both sides. How much am I going to pay? When does it end? How much am I going to receive? When does it end? I got this.
mm,
I'll figure it out. I'll make it happen. And they do. But we have things like at our fingertips vocational coaches. So we can bring in a vocational coach onto the team so they can work with a person who hasn't worked for the last 10 to 20 years or however long and help guide them if that's what they need, if they really don't have any idea of what they want to do. We'll
mhm.
bring in a vocational coach or bring anybody in that can help move this forward.
I think what you're pointing out too is so much of the fear comes when we don't know what that timeline is
Yes,
yet. As
100%.
soon as we have that timeline, then we can start making that plan and we kind of grasp it. I see in my clients that as soon as they know what the timeline is, their anxiety just drops. They start figuring out things. Things start clicking into gear. Yeah.
1%. Yeah, it's nice to see, and it happens every single time. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever had a case where anxiety of the unknown hasn't gone away. I mean, I'm not saying that anxiety goes away, of course, but that unknown factor, once you have those reports, that property report of what do we have and what are we dividing, oftentimes for somebody who hasn't worked, I don't have any retirement savings because they're thinking my spouse has all of the retirement savings. So then it's like, well, but it's community property. It's our retirement savings in your spouse's name. And I have to have the same conversation with said spouse. It's our retirement savings. It's in your name because there's a psychology behind, in my opinion, I think there's a psychology behind an account being in one person's name. There's the
Oh, yeah.
mind factor, which we get to work with too, which is always
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. There's so much psychology
There's
tied
so
up in all of this.
much.
For sure. For
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny. This has been very helpful. And I invite anyone, if you have follow-up questions to this presentation, you have Jenny and my email and our websites here. Don't hesitate to reach out to us with follow-up questions. And if you are interested in working with CDFA, remember the first meeting is always a free consult. So don't hesitate to reach out to Jenny to set that up.